I mean,
something else
Dave,
as
listen,
well.
I respect where you're coming from on several of your points, and I think that I understand why you feel this way, but I think my perspective is just slightly different. And I do disagree with a lot of what you just said. I think the first thing that I got to say I disagree on is, the idea that people are sliding behind my video. I just disagree with that, and the reason I disagree with that is because one, people don't slide about something they heard on the internet. Like, the people don't slide about a YouTube documentary. They slide about one of their homies got killed, one of their friends got murdered in cold blood. How do you explain all the sliding that went on last week before my video came out? All the different things that have been going on in Chicago. You can't really take that stretch and blame it on me and say people are sliding about my video. Like, I'm not exposing information that's not already out there. Like, this is all stuff that was on King Von's Twitter, in King Von's songs. I think the idea that you're going to try and pin violence on me is a bit of a stretch. And I know this is what they do this is what a lot of people have done to DJ Academics, as far as like, the war in Chirac being responsible for the violence. But if you just look at the chain of events, like, the violence has already occurred before I turned up and started looking into it. Like, I wouldn't even bother Googling somebody's name if they weren't already implicated in these situations, right? So it's really a case of, like, the violence was already going on. I'm just here reporting on it. And I think any attempt to kind of blame me or even academics, but let's stick with me, like, to say that people are sliding about my video, I think that's just like, it's a really bad faith way of trying to, like, avoid responsibility, because the people that are really responsible for the sliding or the violence, at the basic level, it's the individuals involved that are picking up a gun and choosing to cause violence. But then at another level, fine, if you want to make the next distinction, it's the city, it's the mayors, the politicians that have allowed these areas to get so bad, so dangerous, where there's no opportunities, that people are kind of forced into these, gang situations where they need to use a gang for protection. I think those people, the politicians, and just the lack of guidance in these areas is much more responsible for the violence than, like, me reporting on it. Because I wouldn't have any, if it hadn't already happened, I wouldn't have anything to report on, right? So it's kind of like, I just think it's a stretch to try and blame me. And I think that the people that need to, for my genuine opinion, is the people that really need to take accountability is, like, the city, the police, the mayor. Because let's be real, like, Chicago is a fucked up place. It's been in a messed up situation for the past, 20 years, realistically, 20 years plus, where these things have been allowed to happen. Someone like Von, setting aside his music career, like, we shouldn't have had a young guy that's in a situation where their father's getting killed when they're 11, right? He's already starting off at a disadvantage with that situation, right? So it's kind of like, the circumstances that exist that allow young people to fall in these dangerous situations, whether it's gang violence, or you've got situations in Chicago where people are doing robberies and that's going wrong and they're ending up in, people are ending up hurt and killed as a result of that. But, like, at the end of the day, I think it's just such a stretch to try and blame me and YouTube videos, when really all we're trying to do is report on what's going on. Like, you've got a guy like King Von who's making Billboard charting songs about how he's killed 7 people. That's really glorifying the violence. You got the guy that's literally committing the murders, rapping about it, getting paid. He's a millionaire. Listen, bro, like, I make a bit of money. I'm not a millionaire. I'm nowhere near a millionaire. Like, King Von was a millionaire wearing APs and diamond chains off the back of allegedly killing people and rapping about it, right? So I don't think I glorify it. I think in my video, I'm actually very careful and very thoughtful when it comes to saying, you said you watched the whole video, so I'm sure you saw it, but there's a section in the video where I explain, look, let's take a step back before we get into this and look at why these circumstances were allowed to happen. I talk about King Von being born into a difficult situation, losing his father at a young age, losing a lot of his friends at a young age. He himself says that seeing his friend White get killed in front of him turned him into a demon. And it's like, these are the situations, like, this messed up environment in Chicago that's been allowed to happen by the city and the state and whoever else is responsible for things getting so bad. Those are the things that turned people into demons or fucked people up. I think to say that people like me that are reporting on it and just trying to give perspective about what's going on in these Billboard charting songs, a guy's going to turn on the radio and hear a guy talking about he's got 7 bodies. I think we all have a right to know whether or not that's true, what the stories are behind that. But I really struggle to agree when it comes to suggesting that, like, I'm responsible for the violence. And I think people that watch my video all the way through, I think you can see I try and approach this topic with a responsible tone. I try and say, look, there are reasons why things are so fucked up in Chicago, especially if you watch my video on the murder of FBG Duck, where, set aside the whole serial killer for a minute. My video on the murder of FBG Duck, I say in that video numerous times, look, you got 5 people here that committed a heinous murder, but these are 5 people who grew up losing all of their best friends, and they were pushed into this situation where it was kill or be killed. So it's kind of like, I think there are people that glorify this kind of stuff. I think you've got channels like Hip Hop Daily, where you've got dudes that are basically just using a robot voice to just fucking, you know, make the easiest, cheapest, most sensational way of cashing in on these bodies. But I'm not one of those. I try and approach my topics very responsibly. I try and do the research the best I can possibly do. And I'll admit, my video had a couple of mistakes in it, a couple of wrong pictures that we got fixed, but that's facts, and I'm willing to admit that. But I don't think that it's fair to say that, like, you could say that my video is responsible for violence. You know, the majority of my videos on gang conflict, I'll usually end the video saying the violence has to stop. You know, if you ever see my project on the Jacksonville gang war, I end that video by saying this has to stop. We got to try and find a way of improving things in these areas. And I think that it's just a stretch to necessarily say I'm responsible or I'm stoking it, because if that's the case, then why was everybody sliding before I dropped my video or before I was making YouTube videos? This has been going on for decades. So that's my view, but you know, I'm interested in your response.
All right, I'm gonna jump in and throw one more question back to you, just like I did to Dave, real quick. So the societal conditions that exist in Chicago and the culture that exists in parts of Chicago that kind of perpetuates this cyclical violence. Obviously, those things don't have anything to do with Trap Lord Ross or with any video that you might put up. We can all say that, right? That goes for any place. But do you see any merit to the idea that there might have been somebody somewhere, because the video already has 1 million views. And when I watched it, obviously, you're good at what you do. It's incredibly well done. But when I watched it, I knew that this would be a big video. It'll probably get to 5, maybe even 7, 10 million views. Do you see the possibility that there might be somebody that goes, you know what? I forgot about all of this, or I'm not, I haven't been really on this, or this hasn't been top of mind, or look at the amount of people, or when you see a picture of somebody that you love that might have been X'd out by the other side, that puts a battery in your back. Do you see that as a possibility from your content? And if you do see it as a possibility of your content, what is the overarching value of your content that you feel like undercuts the notion that there's even a possibility that it can lend itself
So I personally
to
don't
violence?
believe that at all, like straight up. I just don't believe that, because if that's true,
Okay.
then by the same notion, you got to tell the Chicago Tribune to just stop reporting complete media blackout on every murder that happens in Chicago. Because bear in mind, the majority of the names, information in my video, it's clippings from the Chicago Tribune, Chicago Sun-Times, original reporting on these situations going on. You know, you can't just suppress the facts. Like, if somebody gets killed, you can't just have a media blackout and say nobody can ever talk about that this ever happened in case violence continues to happen. And we all know as a fact that if somebody gets killed in one of these conflicts, it's not that people aren't sliding on the Chicago Sun-Times. They're trying to kill the person that killed their loved one. Like, let's be real. Let's break this down. Like, people, like, it just is absurd to me that people are sliding about videos like, oh, they killed my cousin and I wasn't going to do shit. But then Trap Lord Ross mentioned it in a video 12 years later, and now it's time to slide. Like, to me, that's just an absurd leap in logic, when in reality, you need people like me, Chicago Sun-Times, academics, talking about these things. Because if we don't talk about the murders that are happening in these places, it's just going to get swept under the rug and no one's ever going to do anything. I think the city needs to acknowledge what's going on and do more. You know, seeing the mayor with Lil Durk after everything that he has said in music and that he has, you know, associated himself with, I think that does far more damage for the next generation of Chicago and stopping gang violence than someone like me regurgitating information that's already been reported in the Chicago Sun-Times 10 years ago. But at the same time, I can totally understand if the one thing I can walk down on what you're suggesting is that I can understand why it would definitely hurt people's feelings if somebody that they lost many years ago in a gang conflict is being mentioned again, that maybe they've forgotten. It's maybe opening that old wound. I can understand why that might hurt somebody's feelings, but at the same time, this is all derived from a guy, King Von, who was on songs talking about he killed 7 people, his own words in his own songs. And I found it really, really surprising how many people have kind of like come out to try and defend this seemingly serial killer who killed at least 7 people by his own lyrics, and no one spares a thought to the young black men and women that this guy allegedly killed. You know, nobody wants to spare a thought to the families of the people who Von allegedly took away. You know, I've got in my video, you've got once Von dies, you've got the relatives of the people that he killed celebrating. And it's kind of a case of like, it does kind of like, it's kind of crazy to me that so many people are coming out trying to defend Von when, you know, the reality is, this is the guy that was killing people. If people are sliding, it's because this guy killed one of their friends. It's not because me or the news or academics are talking about it. And that's the way I see it. Maybe not everyone agrees, but that's my perspective. So,
I mean,
Dave,
so he making
to
good
you,
points.
he's making
The only